since we celebrated Buddha Purnima the other day, I thought, why not speak about enlightenment? You and I like to go deep anyway, so go straight to the source. And we'll talk about enlightenment today in all three of the traditions. And because that's kind of the defining characteristic of Eastern philosophy, right? One of the defining characteristics, or the heart of all of the philosophies, is this concept or this idea that we can be enlightened. But then we have to understand, what is that? So you and I living overseas for long periods of time and having experiences in Bodh Gaya and Tiruvannamalai and places like that, Kathmandu, the focus is enlightenment, right? So you and I, we can't deny the energy of a place like Bodh Gaya, right? So since Buddha Purnima was the other day, you think of that sort of place and you obviously think of the Buddha. And, the Buddha kind of encapsulates what enlightenment means. But a lot of people misinterpret that because they think that enlightenment has something to do with their persona. So Gayang is enlightened. And so there is no I. Actually, enlightenment is the dissolution of the I. And this is what a lot of people have to understand. It's the dissolution of the I. It's not that I am enlightened or I am that, so to speak. I remember satsang back, must have been back 2011, and this older lady, she was a nice lady, but she went up to Muji and she said, how does an enlightened being like me survive in this world? And you could see a little bit of a body movement in Muji, a bit of cringe. But that's actually, I think a lot of people think about it in that sense. They think they are enlightened, like their persona, their jiva. But like I've mentioned in one of my Enlightenment Today episodes on enlightenment, that enlightenment is the re-identification with the irreducible essence of the universe. So call that Brahman, Shunyata, Tao, what have you, Godhead. It's a re-identification and the dissolution of that jiva. So then it comes down to, well, can we be enlightened in that place forever? That becomes the conversation in all three traditions, And people differ as to whether that is possible or not. If Ramana was here, Ramana Maharishi, he would say, there is only that place anyway. So it doesn't matter if you don't think that you can abide as the self, because there's only the self. And that's a purely non-dualistic Advaita perspective. But then if you speak to someone like Ken Wilber, Ken would say, enlightenment isn't permanent. Or it's not a permanent state of consciousness, so to speak. So you have that awakening like the Buddha had, I am awake, right? It's an awakening that he gave up the search because the one who is searching is the person. It's the sense of Siddhartha Gautama searching for a goal, but we all are intrinsically enlightened, but we are our jiva eclipses that natural state.
Just like Ramana Maharishi, in his circumstance, the self-work must have been much easier, I think, because there would be much less obstacles and disrupt with the practice. But for us, in this day and age, because we live in such busy and very fast speed life, so the practice is a lot harder, and that is why it's not a prolonged state of consciousness that enlightened state that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a good point, because that's why there was even the Vanaprastha, right, back in the Vedic period, where they broke away from society and they concentrated on their own enlightenment. As with Ramana, most people probably listening probably know the story when he left his home at 16, never to return again. So just to sit in Arunachala and just in sadhana that's it, for the rest, he left at 16, so he died at around, I think he was 70.
70.
So That's over 50 years of sadhana, you know what I mean? Like, and not many of us, as you said, it's a good point, have that opportunity because we have the social system in being like, that pressure of the social system always bearing down on us. And I know there's a lot of people that would say, yeah, but we have to find the peace in that. And that's true as well. But you can't discount that from a certain perspective, you are affected by the society and the culture you are in. And if you're not making a little bit of an effort to, in some sense, practice vairagya, so practice dispassion towards worldliness and non-reactiveness, then you're probably not going to get to that enlightened stage. A lot of people, Buddhists, for example, will discount the 6 years of tapas or asceticism that the Buddha went through. You know, I mean, he was a samana, so like he just would walk in a straight direction, wouldn't ask for food, he would get food, and you know, he was basically killing himself by starvation. But there is a lot of, even though, you know, that's an extreme path for us, but you can learn quite a lot from that experience in practicing that sort of samana path, you know. So as you and I know, we see a lot of great yogis and sadhus, and they have that look in their eye that you can't get from being in society and from being just blissed out 24 hours a day, and their heart's very pure. And that has happened because they have kind of disconnected from worldliness and society mainly, you know. So
yeah, the practice of samana which Buddha was doing is something like stop feeding your desires. It's kind of, you stop feeding what you want to be doing. Like, I'm hungry, I need to eat. But he went, again, very extreme. Like, he didn't even eat, he didn't ask for food, nothing. But that's to show that how much he stopped feeding the ego.
yeah,
Like, so I think that allowed him to stay in that pure observer state, meaning the true self state of mind. You're just able to sit back and watch what comes in your mind and watch what lives in your mind, that sort of state. I think that's what it is. But I think that a lot of people might find it difficult in this day and age especially, is that like at our workplace, amongst family or friends, and any social life in general, always assures your ego as me kind of thing, like an objective me, like not true self of I-centered. So it always assures you who you are. Like, you are this name, you're this position at workplace, and you're this character amongst friends and family. And they always, thankfully, they always remind who you are in society. So it's very difficult. We need to develop very strong sense of that pure observer as I. And I think that pure observer, between me as an objective I in the society, that two relationship has to have a bit of a gap. And again, like, we try, but it's not always easy. But actually, this kind of circumstance in today's society kind of makes you practice thorough and stronger in a sense, because there's much more distractions in the world.
Yeah. Well, that's the game that we're all playing, who are all born into this world, is that the socialization is trying to develop the sense of personality, the sense of I, whereas your spiritual nature is like, doesn't need that. Do you know what I mean? So your true nature is indifferent to your sense of I, you know. So everything you do, like you said, your family reassure you, you're Guyang, this is who you are. Your workplace expects a certain thing from you. This is why when you study psychology, they say most of us in general have 15 personalities. because we have one personality with our friends, one personality with our family, maybe even one personality with the guru. You don't know. So you have all of these different personalities, and this is causing like a schizoid split in the mind, because you can't just be who you are. And so the game for us is to kind of unravel from all of this socialization, So Buddhism and Hinduism don't tackle that as much, but Taoism will tackle that, because you have clever people like Zhuangzi and that, or Lao Tzu, who will actually say that it can be counterproductive to your spiritual growth to remain in society, to continue to promote these habits of your sense of I that's not really you, like to continually live these out is only going to intensify your belief in your identity, when you actually have to hit the reverse button and go back within yourself and try and, in a sense, disintegrate all of those identifications that you have with this sense of ego that you think you are. And so, but like you said, being wound up in this society can make your practice more thorough. It can, make your goal more defined in some sense. We can say that, but it is also good to be up in a mountain and just shanti shanti, you know what I mean? We can't discount that as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure you and I and everyone listening we would love to do that, but that's not our circumstance, because life is the way it is, and we have to, in some sense, take care of our material needs, in the sense that all we need is really like good, healthy food, clothing, and shelter is what we need. And what the Buddhist path symbolizes is that we need a healthy balance between that and also our spiritual goal of enlightenment. So you need to take care of your physical being, and your mind to a certain degree, but they are still secondary to your path, So, but if you, as he realized, if you negate the body too much, if you neglect it, then that can actually have a negative effect on your spiritual growth too.
Yeah, absolutely. Going up in the mountains or staying in a monastery for a certain amount of time, these experiences are very important and essential, actually, because we have to give ourselves at least a little bit of opportunity to be in a complete tranquility, for example. Whereas in the society, when do we even get to just be in quietude? Like those who are with family or the children all the time, there's always constant background noise will go on, and never to mention our own mind keep just chattering inside, and you should do this, you should do that, and always kind of disturbs us from being complete quietude.
Yes.
And sometimes we need to kind of force ourselves to be in a situation where we have to look within. There could be just somewhere to go somewhere nice and a retreat or monastery or something like that. Again, for some people like those monks or yogis, for example, they can choose that path to be in that place for as long as they want. But I don't think that's also for everyone.
No.
Like everyone has different aptitude and different personality, temperament, and we all have a different way to find our own peace. It very depends on individual needs and personality. So consider these things. We need to develop our own way to practice these things under our own circumstance.
Yes.
Yeah.
But like what you said, importantly, was that, yes, we all have different aptitudes and different circumstances, but if you don't put yourself in a situation where you have that opportunity to dive deep, then it's difficult to get to that place just off the bat from reading a book or from just sitting in your New York apartment. It's difficult if you're living in Times Square or something like this, Whereas if you go and spend some time in an ashram or a monastery, that can open the gate up a little bit, and can give you a little look inside yourself, and it's like, oh, now I know the direction to go. So you need sort of a guide in a sense, right? Like if we look at Buddhism, if you can't develop or cultivate shamatha, if you can't develop tranquility of mind, then you've got no chance of experiencing jhana. You know what I mean? You have no chance to experience jhana. And to experience shamatha, you have to spend a lot of time in a monastery to get into that level. You know this level, like after a few weeks, you get into this level where your mind is very stable and very tranquil. It's analogous to the yogi idea of flattening the water out or stilling the water so you can see right into your true nature. But that's the beginning of where jhana begins. But if you can't, from a Buddhist perspective, if you can't even establish shamatha where you are in the city, then it's going to be difficult to get into the deeper states of meditation and understanding who you truly are. We both know that from living in cities and living in monasteries and being in remote places away from the world for long periods of time. And then when you come back to the world, then you have to really intensify your practice, and you have to sort of be on your toes a little bit when you're in society, So, that's also important. Is like what you said is about, we need to dedicate some time to whatever path you follow. You know what I mean? You might want to go to whatever, but you might want to go to a monastery in Sri Lanka or Thailand, or might want to go to China and find a hermit or something like this. But what's important is the effort that you put in towards it. This is what bodhicitta is, right? Bodhicitta in Buddhism is you need to have that inexhaustible effort towards your enlightenment. That has to be your central focus in your life, and really has to be a central focus. You know what I mean? We often cloud our perception with that. We aren't really focused on that. Yeah, of course we all want to be enlightened, but want to pay the bills, or want to go to the pub on Friday, want to see the boys or the girls, And it's like, yeah, but you're not taking that extra step that has to happen. And when you do what you said, when someone does say, look, I'm going to put my life in my own hands, and I'm going to go somewhere for a while, maybe 6 months, or maybe a month, you know what I mean? But I'm really going to dedicate to try and, cleanse my persona out and dive deep. That'll put your life in a new direction,
Yeah, people have a lot of different ideas on practice and enlightenment and whatnot. But I personally believe that anyone who are willing to do some spiritual practice, we all should put quite extensive amount of time in a quite disciplined manner of practice, I believe. Otherwise, without that sort of experience, like you said, they'll need to put a lot of effort. Without that, I think we won't know what we're really looking for, right? Yeah. Without that sort of experience, how do we know in the society that what kind of peace that we were looking for, really, if we didn't have any experience of being in the complete tranquility, for example? Without that sort of experience, people, like you said, you can try to read some book written by Aldous Huxley, for example, or some like Joseph Campbell, Alan Watts, all these great people that we had in the past. You read those books, you wouldn't really understand what they really mean by that, for example. But those people all had been to overseas, and especially places like India, or just had their personal experience through intense practice, their own way of practicing. So without the experience, you won't know what you're really looking for.
No.
So deep books like Perennial Philosophy, for example, by Aldous Huxley, has many layers of understanding, right? And to be able to get the thorough juice out of the book, you need to have your own personal experience which really touched your deepest part of yourself. And to be able to do that, we need to get out there and put some effort and discipline to really find something that feels the truth within you. And I think this sign of someone who have experienced these is that they have this look in their eyes. Like, for example, Ramana Maharishi, that eyes that just blissful at all times. People say that when he was alive, there's lots of people going to see him, and they talk about their problems and they want to, solve these problems and, troubles with work, relationship, or whatever. And Ramana just sit there, just look at them, not saying anything. That's just a blissful, just full of love and compassion, that kind of eyes, which only can come from your personal experience and realization, I believe.
I remember Alan Watts he had a big picture of Ramana, that famous picture of Ramana, his face, and when Alan would go out, he'd always look at that because he'd just think to himself, "Come on, man, it's not that serious. Don't take it too serious.
Yeah, everything is okay.
Everything's okay."
Yeah.
So. But again, like you said, you obviously you have to read deep literature, but you have to frame it through a rich experience as well. You have to get out there and actually, you have to be on the front line spiritually, and try to, live what these books are mentioning. You know what I mean? Like, you put yourself out on the journey. Like you mentioned Joseph Campbell, when Joseph left America and then he was on the boat and then he bumps into Krishnamurti. You know what I mean? Like, you would never, it's a Hollywood script, right? Like, he bumps into Krishnamurti and then it's like, changes his whole life. You know what I mean? And then, he went to Trivandrum and that after that and met many great gurus and so forth and so on. So, and Joseph became who he is, or who he was. And so that's for all of us, you know what I mean? You just got to get out there and you got to know that you're going to be perfectly fine. But you got to get out there and also throw yourself into, like what we were talking about. You have to put effort into following the path of liberation and seeking enlightenment. Because, we put a lot of effort into buying a car or a house or maintaining our family. Why not put that amount of effort into this? You know what I mean? So, and then a lot of people will say, yeah, but isn't enlightenment very effortless? And isn't our true nature? We don't have to try for it and this and that. And that's true too. But what you see with those people is they can become very flaky and their enlightenment is not truly actual. It's not actualized, So it's like you have to look at it from the Zen perspective. And I mentioned in the last podcast with Shunro Suzuki, when the lady said, why do we do this for? And he's like, she's like, what do we practice all this Zazen? And he's like, well, as a craftsman does something like this, we meditate because that's what Buddhas do. And so we also put that effort in, but you're putting the effort in without trying to attain the goal. That's the difference between other things you do in the world and enlightenment itself. And that's the paradox of enlightenment that a lot of people get caught in, because they think that enlightenment is something linear like anything else. Like you play violin, right? The more you practice, the better you're going to become. This is a very linear process.
Yeah, there is solid goal.
There's solid goal.
Yeah.
But with enlightenment, it's non-linear. Its nature is not bound to time and space. It's beyond those. And that's what you understand when you understand Buddhist and Hindu philosophy especially, is enlightenment is this non-linear aspect of ourselves that's not bound to time and space and is essentially eternal. So how do you unlock that? That becomes the trick. See, how do you unlock that state of consciousness? And so what Shunro Suzuki is talking about is that to unlock that state of consciousness, you have to truly understand that the journey is the destination and destination is the journey. It's that sort of paradoxical nature of enlightenment. So, of course, you have to be on a journey of self-discovery or enlightenment. But the journey itself is the destination. There's not really a place to get to when we're talking about enlightenment. It's a state of consciousness that dawns upon you, but it was already your nature. It's kind of like that old Zen story where he sat around and he just started laughing because he realized, like, you know, he just started laughing. They were looking at him like, what's wrong with that guy? You know what I mean? But he just finally realized, like, you know, it just dawned upon his consciousness. You know what I mean? So that's the nature of what it is, and I think that's how it is for everybody. And the problem is when we turn enlightenment into some sort of goal to reach. You know, I often talk about the path of liberation, this and that. We have to talk in those terms, you know, because we are living within time and space. But we also have to realize that that's our intrinsic nature, but we can't turn it into some sort of like linear goal that we're going to get to and we're going to celebrate at the end of it. Because all that happens is like what happened with that Zen monk. Like I said, it's just uncontrollable laughter and bliss and a realization that the self you thought you were was actually an illusion and false. And actually, like from a Buddhist perspective, is completely impermanent. You know, the nature, it's impermanent. So that's the realization we all go through. So as I mentioned earlier, like enlightenment being the re-identification with that irreducible essence. So that's the process we have to go through. So then we have to talk about then, well, how do we get there? And it's like, well, that's the paradox, see, because you can't turn your meditation practice into something that you think is going to evoke a goal. You have to meditate for the sake of meditation itself. That's what Shunryu was trying to teach that American lady. And America being very goal-oriented culture, it was very difficult, especially at that time, to understand that sort of concept because I think Shunryu was there in the 70s. So we're talking a long time ago, not a long time ago, but you know, we're talking 40 years ago. And so it was very difficult. It's still difficult today because when people come across Eastern spirituality and you say that enlightenment is not goal-oriented, then instantly your question is, well, why meditate at all? Why do anything? Because I can just do nothing and I can be shanti. And it's like, it doesn't really work like that because it's still like, if we have a dirty window, that dust is still on the window. You have to do a little bit of like
sweeping.
A little bit of sweeping, you know. That's what they say when people mention Buddhism. They say it's not a religion. They say Buddhism is more of a science of mind because the philosophy purifies the mind. See, when you follow Buddhism, it purifies the mind. And same with Hinduism. They have obviously you have to purify your karma and your vasanas to affect your samskaras. So you, in a sense, have to do a little bit of internal management, a little bit of sweeping here and there. But it's not, in some sense, if you're doing that, then the goal then becomes just the continuation of purifying your mind, which then will become problematic, you know. So you have to tend to some things and then just trust your meditation practice that it's going to reveal this true part of yourself, you know.
Yeah, it's a kind of very new way of thinking for us all, I think. We've always been trained and educated in a way to achieve something, achieve a goal, so that you can prove what you have done,
Yes.
right? And that we've trained that since at a very young age. And we apply the same school of thought for spiritual practice as well, right? And we want some sort of achievement. We want to see the result and rewards and whatnot. But yeah, again, like you just mentioned, just a spiritual practice is not goal-oriented at all. In a way, it's much more adventurous and kind of a good journey, I think. We can take it that way because it's a big challenge and big work that we need to put for ourselves and the kind of rest of our life. Our mind is always evolving from experience or from reading something, just living life in general, always getting new information, right? And from that new information, it can be just emotional reaction or just the daily life, or you meet someone, bump someone in the street and have a bad experience or good experience. It's just always accumulating some kind of new information constantly that stays within our mind. And if we're not awake, we let these mind to affect our own being, emotionally or psychologically, and they can damage you in a way that you get conditioned by a certain experience. It could become a traumatic experience, or you get entirely be happy regardless of what, that sort of so it becomes part of you if you don't have a kind of a shield from that sort of activity of mind. Yes. And that is just ongoing. Like, we're not gonna drop dead, right? We're gonna, life goes on, right? We always say something bad happens, life goes on, shit happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Same thing. So it's constant process that we need to go through. And every time when we have different experience, we can be a bit like, we're more lighthearted. Oh, this is new. How am I going to react now? But then that state is a good place because you can sit back and step back and kind of you watch your mind or reaction. It's just like as a third party. Yes. And that allows us to deal with the situations that we have much wisely, much more wisely. So it's a process, and life is like just a long theater or movie, if we put it that way. And we just constantly chipping that polluted mind, chipping out, so we don't get affected by any experience that minds just quickly jump in it and react and choose how to react and things like that. Yeah, we need to get a handle of it. Yeah.
Most of our movies are like a horror film.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? That movie that you never want to watch, actually.
Yeah. Mine's like a comedy.
Well, yeah, very much.
Yeah. But yeah, exactly. So that's the thing, when we have all of that, like you said, all of that information that comes into our consciousness every day is affecting our samskaras, our subconscious. So you have if we use like a computer terminology, we have like a hard drive is over full, like it can't contain any more. But the problem is that full hard drive, that full samskaras is informing your thoughts, informing your behavior, and then it's hard to get out of that state, because then that leads to like psychological problems, because you're trying to achieve one thing with your spiritual practice or just with your life in general, but your mind is geared towards something else, or it's thinking about something else. And that's not technically because that's who you are. That's because your samskaras, your subconscious, is completely overloaded. It's full. And what meditation does is what you said, is that it gives you a chance to put the brakes on this informational stream coming into our consciousness. You put a bit of a dam up and you're blocking this stream coming into your eyes and your ears, you know. In a sense, you have to block, because this is an energy, right? This is an energy. You have to block that energy coming in through your eyes and your ears. And meditation allows you to kind of be conscious of what's healthy for you and what's not, in some sense, you know. Like, if you're just going to sit there and binge on Netflix and you're going to just go from one YouTube clip to the next, and you don't leave time for a lot of psychological digestion, then that's just going to continue to accumulate in your mind, in your subconscious, and that's going to affect your vasanas, your habits and your tendencies, which will affect your karma, your actions and your unconscious actions. And you know, a lot of people, this is why it's so hard to break habits, see, because people are in that habit, The vasanas that just feel comfortable, just living out this karma, the vasanas are comfortable with that. And people wonder, well, it's so difficult to change habits. And yes, it is because of that reason, because you've got all of this karmic stock in your samskaras, and you're continually trying to live that out. You continually, you think you feel comfortable with certain ways and certain habits that you have, but that's actually leading you into an unhealthy state of mind. People do this, like if we look at diet, it's very cut and dry, right? So people who are obese have certain habits that are killing themselves. That's an analogy for how we are psychologically and spiritually. We have certain habits that are killing ourselves psychologically and spiritually, and we then can't attain high states of consciousness or understand what you and I were talking about with enlightenment. It's not possible, because you have to, in a sense, clean the basement out a little bit. If the basement is full, your chances of going into deeper states of meditation is nil and void. You know what I mean? But you, again, don't want to turn that into some sort of goal that you need to follow. Look, we can be serious about it. It should be a goal to clean out your samskaras and to transform your vasanas and your karma. But that can't become the path. You need to understand that fundamentally you're enlightened, but as we were talking about, you need to just do a little bit of cleaning here and there and just dive more into your meditation practice, which then will give you that sense that we were talking about. Like you said, it's a different way of thinking, right? Completely different way. It transforms your perspective of time and space, because when we talk about enlightenment, we have to talk about the present moment. All of the reasons why I wrote Enlightenment Now, right, was with what you and I are talking about. Because when we have goals are usually built on our past experiences, and we project those into the future. We do that with enlightenment. We are this way, so we are not really a psychologically healthy person. I want to get to where the Buddha or Shankara was, or someone like this. But then when we have a mentality like that, we continually come across obstacles. So enlightenment is the complete realization that there is only the present moment. There's only ever been the present moment, even though we have this ability to think about the future and think about the past. But that comes from, in some sense, our samskaras. It comes from our ability to, like you said, with all that information, we've absorbed that information, we've had experiences. Experiences are information, right? We're downloading information through experiences. And that becomes part of our samskaras. And then that's how we want to build our future. It doesn't mean we stop planning and so forth and so on. It just means that you understand that any plan you make now can only be experienced in the present moment in the future. It's not something that is actually something that really exists. It's technically a mirage in the desert, you know what I mean? Doesn't exist.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Because even the goal we set today, the goal will remain the same, right? But say tomorrow, you'll feel different. But you are not acknowledging yesterday's you and today's you are different. But to keep the goal the same is there must be some kind of a friction there, right? And so it's kind of keeping a goal very specific and very thorough can somewhat disturb your present moment's practice, for example, because you are already changing whether you know or not, and you keep the goal the same, and you become very rigid, and you try to stick in that frame of practice that you set a few days ago or a few weeks ago, and you still keep trying to keep the same way of practicing. Whereas if you kind of allow yourself to just grow, well, again, discipline end goal, like you said, we need it at some point. But we also need to have the time to just let ourselves grow and be in the very present moment. And that itself can open a lot of doors and a lot of answers that we never got before.
Exactly. Yeah, when you say, and when we say, discipline and goal, it's kind of like wink, wink. Like we have that because you do need that, but that can't in and of itself become why you do the spiritual practice. This can become a problem too, right? We see this with hatha yogis, we see this with people who practice Tai Chi Chuan and disciplines like this, where you can lead into something like peacock consciousness. Peacock consciousness being like, look at me, like look at my development here. And you kind of, they are developed, there's no doubt about that. But the idea of enlightenment and this and that is way, way back in the rear view mirror. It's not in the rear view mirror, it's way off in the distance. I shouldn't say rear view mirror, it's way off in the distance and almost out of sight for them now because though, yes, we should have discipline and we should have a goal, wink, that the discipline can't become the path itself. This is where a lot of people make mistakes, especially when they practice, like I said, especially those two disciplines and disciplines, subdivisions of those disciplines, they can become problematic. Like, for example, if we look at Tai Chi Chuan, where we have people very rigid in their practice and practice for a long time, and you do actually need that to develop in that discipline because you're trying to work on the fight or flight system, you're trying to balance the yin and yang out within yourself. But if the practice itself becomes the goal, and that becomes everything that you're doing, that's just your focus, then I think you've lost sight of why you actually are engaged in this practice. And, we've had conversations with many people about that who are involved in that because not just Tai Chi Chuan, but also Hatha Yoga and other yogic disciplines. But that can become the problem and discipline then can become a problem for your own spiritual growth. So, but then, see, this is where it's so difficult and so tricky. It's such a tricky terrain when we talk about spirituality and we talk about enlightenment, because then you have other people on the other spectrum who say we should have no goal and just be free, and then actually in some sense there's a lack of spiritual growth more in those people than there are in the rigid practitioner. You know what I mean? Because at least in the rigid practitioner, we have bodhicitta, we have effort, we have like at least an energy going towards something. You know what I mean? They may have forgot about that their energy is supposed to be towards enlightenment and a complete equanimous mind. But the other person who's just like a hippie and just going, why practice, man? Why have discipline? Can lead into even worse habits. You know what I mean? So, and we've seen that. That's a bit of a new age temperament. That's kind of the new age spirituality that kind of came out of the 60s and 70s when Zen and Taoism and Hinduism and Buddhism became popular in the West. It became a little bit like that. And look, there are certain people who have aptitudes for that. Like, for example, we mentioned before Ramana Maharishi. And all Ramana practiced was vicharya, so self-inquiry. And he just practiced an abidance in the self. And he was the self, the Atman. And that's it. He wasn't doing any hatha yoga or anything. That was his practice, was just to be in complete stillness. Now, the question then becomes is that a discipline that he's doing, or is he just completely realized, completely self-realized? And the argument is obviously that he's completely enlightened. So from that perspective, there's not really a need for discipline and this and that. But us mere mortals who are on the path, there is a need for effort and discipline. This becomes sort of a relation to Gautama the Buddha's path, from being Siddhartha Gautama to becoming a Buddha. So, where he had 6 years of, extreme tapas and asceticism, and then in kind of a sense giving up. We can say giving up because like when you talk about nirvana means the candle's blown out, you know. So that means the end of will is what we're talking about, the end of volition. So there's no. It's game over. You know what I mean? I'm not playing the game no more. I'm not trying to attain anything. I'm not trying to get anything from life. I don't have an axe to grind no more. My sharpness is completely blunt. And but again, he realized that through so many years of extreme practice.
There's definitely the paradox in discipline. In a sense, a long period of time, if you were to be very disciplined in something to do with like material orientated, for example, physical exercises or diet or just anything that discipline that related to physicality or material based, it can give you very rigid approach in things. We know this with the Hatha Yoga practitioner or the Chinese martial art practitioners. They need to set their life in their very certain way, and if a little bit go out of what they planned, they will like snap or they'll get frustrated. So if we were to do that kind of discipline for a long period of time, we might subtly develop this very rigid and very, not loose, not natural, somewhat very mechanical type of characteristics within you. But whereas psychological discipline can be a bit different. When you go through a long period of physical discipline, you might have a moment when I can't do this anymore. I'm out. This kind of realization as well, and that can come in a psychological discipline, like how Buddha went through, and long period of psychological discipline. And moment that he realized was that when he actually gave up that discipline.
Gave up the search.
He gave up the search, yes. So there is very like fine line between discipline and not discipline.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But definitely that, for example, anyone who never disciplined their life, they just do whatever they wanted just to get the best out of the convenient lifestyle that we have, will definitely need some type of discipline to stop feeding that wants and desires, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you have to have a temperament like Shunryu Suzuki. This is the thing with spiritual practice. You have to have discipline, but you have to frame it through that understanding of the world. So that understanding that you're not trying to... It's just so difficult to get your head around. You're not trying to attain it, but you're doing this. You know what I mean? You've turned the world into a complete verb. It's just doing, you know what I mean? Like, you're just doing this. There's no goal to get to, you know what I mean? Like, so even if you practice Hatha Yoga and Tai Chi Chuan, yes, you are developing, but this is just what you do. This is what you do. And once you... See, the problem is when peacock consciousness comes in is when you start to create a goal or you start to think about your level of practice, how developed you are, then you start looking down at other people like, I'm the one here. I'm the one. And it's like, no. Like a teacher is not like that. You know what I mean? They're even more humble than the students. Do you know what I mean? They're only there to help the individuals develop. They're not there to, show off and to belittle the students, you know what I mean? They have to learn from that teacher. The teacher has to be an example. And often what do we see in the world today? Not just within those disciplines, but in many spiritual disciplines, that the guru or the teacher can become, very conceited, very like, it's all about them,
Yeah, in that peak of consciousness,
Yep.
That means that individual, either their desire to practice got polluted, or fundamentally they misunderstood why they do spiritual practice. Yeah.
Yep.
Then ego steps in.
Slips under the door.
Yes. Yeah. And feed this, pride.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, look at me, like I can do this, like I don't know, I'm enlightened. I don't know.
Yeah. It's a problem. See, if you're a spiritual teacher of any sort, then you always, in a sense, have to remain a student. You have to keep a student's mindset, and you have to keep the perspective of a student. Sure, I can be here teaching people in this podcast and the videos I do, but I myself have to put myself in those people's shoes. I was once there too, once upon a time, as with anyone else. And doesn't make me any better or worse. We're all the same. And once you have that perspective, then you can actually teach and you remain humble without letting yourself get too carried away, because those traits, those egotistical traits, there's so much bound to us from our socialization, from our indoctrination, that it's very sometimes difficult even for a spiritual teacher to overcome, because they're on such a subtle level. You know what I mean? You can practice all of these disciplines and you can transform your fight or flight system where you're very lucid and nothing really affects you, but then there can still be vanity and all of these things can still be a part of your psychology, which is detrimental actually to your spiritual growth, because to develop the mind, we're trying to develop the mind, right? You have to transform those qualities. So anger has to become compassion, hatred has to become forgiveness, vanity has to become humility, these sorts of things, So that's on a very subtle level. We can do as much spiritual practice as we want. We can open up all of the meridians and all the channels, but those things can still lag in anyone. You know what I mean? How many times have we seen spiritual teachers all around the world who have showcased a sense of arrogance or conceit, and look, they're human as well. We shouldn't completely judge them. We all make mistakes, and that they may have just had an off day, but you see some of them, their behavior is like that a lot, like almost all the time. And some people resonate with that and some people don't, you know what I mean? So those egotistical traits, those traits that we've all been indoctrinated with, are the things that we have to really work on a subtle level. And stillness meditation works on those on a subtle level. They can be transformed with the other disciplines we spoke about, but if you really want to get down to the very subtle level, then you have to practice stillness meditation, like conventional meditation, sitting meditation. That's why actually part of Hatha Yoga and Tai Chi Chuan and other martial arts, you're supposed to practice meditation as well. But often you see with a lot of practitioners, they focus just on the actual craft, and then they develop themselves in that, and they are developing psychologically in that, but these subtle traits continue to persist in the background. The theater is not empty yet. There's still a few people in the back like poking you, you know what I mean? So, and that's the path that we all go through. And you have to realize that, We've all made mistakes too, so we have to realize that as well. It's not that you're going to become superhuman. It means you're going to become human. That's the difference, right? We're not human yet. That's the ideal of becoming a human, is someone who's not at odds with their own humanity. They understand their nature and the nature of the world. This leads to enlightenment, you know what I mean? So you can't create the miraculous. You have to become humble and realize what's the nature of the universe and nature of our own existence. And so, for everyone listening, and they say, well, so what should we do? Should we have discipline? Should we put effort in?
Should we not?
And should we not? And it's like, of course you should. You need discipline. You know what I mean? But you have to frame it in the way that Shunryu Suzuki frames it. You know what I mean? Like, for example, you cook to eat, right? You meditate because that's just what Buddhas do.
Yeah.
You know, cooking is for nutrition. Meditation is for Buddha-ness. That's what it is. It's you're nourishing your Buddha-ness in yourself, inside yourself, your Buddha nature. And if you're not nourishing that aspect, then everything else is meaningless. You can continue to nourish the body, but in society you're a prick. You know what I mean? So you need to nourish that aspect of yourself too. And in nourishing that, then you come back more into accord with the present moment, and that allows you to deal with not only the present moment a lot better, but it allows you to see the future and the past with more clarity. Instead of them becoming some sort of sense of anxiety upon you, that's loosened a bit, you know, because we're always anxious about the future, right? When our mind is not right, we're anxious about what's going to happen, and these are all hypotheticals. You know, I saw some psychological research, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was like, the amount of things we think about the future that actually never happen is catastrophic. Like, it overwhelms the amount of things that you think about that actually happen. Do you know what I mean? And you just think about your own mind, like, when you've thought about things in the future that it's impossible that they could happen. And so why is the mind... And it comes back to what you were saying before, this informational overload, these samskaras are overflowing. And so there's so many different scenarios that are always playing out in your head that just never happen.
That's to show how much we basically waste our time and energy on something that has no meaning.
Has no meaning. Exactly. When you can just, you can just be quiet, sit down, meditate, observe your mind, or observe your breath, and that's enough. You know what I mean, when you say that's enough, that really scares people. They're like, but that becomes people's addiction to thinking. See, they're addicted to thinking. It's like what Watt said that time. Alan Watt said, "You've got nothing else to think but thoughts."
Yeah.
That's all you're thinking is thoughts. And so we're all addicted to thinking itself, and overthinking is the problem, because, as I mentioned, most of the thoughts that we think about are useless or unnecessary. It's just the samskaras all mixed and jumbled up, just burping up, and they're coming to the forefront of your mind. You're thinking, oh, that could happen. That could happen. Did you see what she did the other day? Did you see what he did? And it's like, these are all meaningless thoughts. And they're draining your energy. They're draining your energy to actually be in the present moment and this and that. So people really get nervous when you say, what are you going to do today? I'm just going to sit there. And they don't want to be a part of that, because that's too frightening. Because what happens then? You have to face your own mind. And facing your own mind, I forget who said it, but they said that there's nothing's more frightening than facing your own mind. It's
when we are hungry, right? We crave for food, yeah, and mind craves thought. Yeah. Thoughts are just like food for mind. And just like a food analogy in general, like if we were to eat fast food all the time, what happens to the body? You get fat and you'll have all kinds of health problems. Then again, same for the mind. If you keep feeding your mind with all these meaningless thoughts, even lots of distractions or gossips or things that just not nutritious thoughts, then you will become that thought. You will entertain that thought, keep chewing that unhealthy thought, right? Then your mind become unhealthy, and that'll affect you deeply psychologically. But instead of doing that, if you were to feed our mind with the good thoughts, for example, through meditation practice day in, day out, or
Study.
Yes, study, yes, reading good books, and that's actually when the kind of boredom is a good sign, I think. Boredom means you don't have any thoughts to chew on, somewhat, right? Oh, I'm bored, then I need something new. And that means there is nothing else to chew on in your mind.
Yes.
Then that's a great moment to, let's say, practice quietude, sit in silence. You don't have to be in this lotus posture if you don't want to. Just sit in complete silence. Or, put a candle on and incense on and enjoy the good aroma. That's gonna, feed your mind very healthy way, and you'll naturally be happy. And, study books, or if you have a spare time, and watch good documentaries. That's something very interesting and very helping you develop your knowledge, deepen your knowledge.
Like The Art of Effortless Living, is that what you're saying?
Oh, yes. yes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, we can always feed our mind with healthy food.
Yes.
Just like our body.
Yes, for sure. Well, that boredom is a feeling of uncomfortability with nothing. Because we are so used to thinking and accumulating and stimulating ourselves. And when you cut that off, the boredom arises. So it's a feeling, it's an uncomfortable feeling of lack of activity in the mind. Because the mind is accustomed to give me something to chew on, you know what I mean? Like I want something, give me some information, or give me something to do. But then next minute when you cut all that off and then that boredom arises, that's a good sign. Like you said, it's a good sign, and you should explore the boredom. Because when you go through the boredom, that's when you get to high states of bliss and happiness. It's not through filling the boredom up full of sensory activity. And we also have to think about that thoughts themselves are a process of doing. So, for example, if you're sitting there and you're just thinking a lot, and you're saying, I'm non-doing, it's like, no, you're not. You're completely doing, because that's an activity. It's just an activity that you and I can't see on someone, but it's happening within them. It's an activity. And so what that does is it drains your sympathetic nervous system. You know what I mean? So if you're always, I should say drained, you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. If you're always activating your sympathetic nervous system, you are destroying your nervous system, because the autonomic nervous system has the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And if you're not activating the parasympathetic nervous system with non-doing, with stillness and quietude, then the sympathetic nervous system can't function properly when it needs to. Because all you're doing is you're activating the sympathetic nervous system, the doing aspect of ourselves. You're busy. And then you're wondering why you're reacting emotionally to someone, or you're a pain in the ass for people, you know.
Yeah, a bit uncharacteristic reaction.
Exactly. And that's from an over-emphasis on the sympathetic nervous system. And a lot of people don't understand the nervous system, but this is the way it is. If you don't have a healthy balance, and you're supposed to offset your autonomic nervous system with the parasympathetic nervous system, you should be spending many hours, not many, but you should be spending quite a few hours a day in stillness, which actually enhances intellectual life and your life. You're doing the doing aspect of your life. So, but if you're only doing and busy in here as well, then this is destroying your state of mind. And that's what people don't understand. They think that, well, I'm just gonna do nothing today. I'm gonna chill out, watch TV, and this and that. And this is, I'm replenishing my nervous system. And it's like, no, you're not. You're only still contributing to more damage, because you might be watching HBO or something like that, and you think that nothing's really happening, but you're absorbing this energy through your eyes and ears. This is having an effect on your nervous system, And you're also thinking about things during the day, and that's also having an effect. So, as in yoga, as with what Patanjali said, you have to kind of try to settle those waters out. And to settle those waters of mind, to still that mind, to make it tranquil and reflective, is to start to access the parasympathetic nervous system more. Become accustomed to that every day. What's that boredom feel like? What's that state of mind where the mind's a bit agitated because it wants to do something, but you're saying, no, not time to do now. It's time to sit, meditate, and just be. Once you start to train your mind like that, then that affects your whole state of being. And then that opens the door for higher states of consciousness and abilities to think clearly without having your thoughts overwhelm you in certain situations, or when you're lying in bed at night, when your thoughts can be racing for some people, you'll just fall asleep effortlessly. So it has such a great effect. And this also affects our ability to experience enlightenment, or to abide as the self, abide as the Atman, or the non-self in Buddhism, and Atman, to abide in those states of consciousness, because once the train of thought has kind of subsided, then your mind's very stable and present, and the mind itself, we use the term purify the mind, right? But the mind itself is in a sense pure, but the nature of the mind is like water. You throw a rock into it, it creates ripples. And information and stimulation and all of this is like throwing not just rocks, but throwing like buses and buildings into the water. You know what I mean? We're creating tidal waves within our mind. So the mind itself is innocent, but it's the identification with the ripples of the mind is the problem. That creates the ego, right? We're identifying with the ripples of the mind. But the mind itself is tranquil and reflective, but we have to find ways to still that. We have to chitta vritti nirodha in yoga. We have to nirodha being stillness, the settling of the mind, to go to deep states of consciousness. So the Atman and the Purusha are at the bottom of the ocean, and you can see the nature when the mind the water is still. But we've developed a society, like we were mentioning earlier, that only cultivates this sense of I, cultivates a clinging to the waves of the ocean. No, Gaiyang's like this. You should behave this way, because if you behave out of turn with that, people are going to, oh, she's strange. You know what I mean? We live with a lot of self-preservation. And self-preservation can affect our spiritual growth, because self-preservation is built on survival. So if you're constantly in a state of survival, you're in a constant state of protection of that image of yourself. But enlightenment is like waving the white flag, like, he's over. This guy's, we're throwing the towel in, that guy's dead. I don't care what people think of me. I don't need validation from other people.
Yeah, we have a wrong idea of, say, life, how to live life in order to survive in the world, right? That's why we build this persona, to be this person in a certain way in the world to survive. But that conventional way of living and this idea of survival is that's not it.
No.
Yeah.
It's a materialist perspective.
Yeah. And that again eclipses our own realization of the effort that we're trying to figure out who we really are.
Exactly.
Right? And as we perpetuate living that conventional life, like what's happening around the world, you'll suffer from a lot of mental problems, because that's unnatural to us, to human nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like your all your effort is going into your material needs,
Yeah.
and that's a big problem with New Age spirituality, because New Age spirituality, sorry, is a loose understanding of Eastern spirituality, an over sensationalized view of Eastern spirituality, but it's linked so much to materialism, like wealth and abundance and success. And you can tell a lot of people who follow that have never even been to the East, because as you and I know, I mean, it's a very humble life.
Yeah.
It's not about abundance. Actually, having abundance is counterproductive to spiritual life in some sense. So you see that all of the energy goes into then, well, I need to accumulate wealth to survive. I need to have a good house, because that'll establish my sense of success and status within society. It's all survival oriented, and we forget that spirituality, though we need to understand our material needs, we're talking about the inner world here, the inner world and the world beyond. So and to access that more and to become enlightened, if you're constantly pointing all of your energy towards your survival, you're not allocating any energy for your spiritual growth. You're kind of, you're neglecting that. And that's what's happening. That's why when you see people who do follow New Age spirituality, and they can be very flaky and this and that, and if you do point out their flaws, they get very emotional and this and that, because they're so invested in their persona. And see, the height of the ego is self-defense, right? Is self-defense. And it in and of itself is a survival temperament. The ego is trying to survive. It's predicated on your belief in it. So it's trying to survive. When enlightenment, our true nature, is saying that thing don't really exist, that thing that you think you are. You need to give up and trust the game a little bit, because survival is going to continue the perpetuation of that ego and your belief in it. So you need calculated steps to expose that about yourself. If you're constantly in a game, this is the thing, right? You see people that are constantly in a game of self-defense. Self-defense is the height of the ego. It's trying to survive. And so when people expose it to certain things, we always think about our self-image. You know what I mean? Like what people think of us and this and that. And as you see, as you and I know, with some of the Pashaputtas in the Shaiva tradition, they intentionally look crazy.
That's right.
We've seen.
A lot, yeah.
Like time we saw the naked sadhu in Varanasi.
Yeah.
Just like singing like
Just
idiotically, like it
mumbling.
made no sense. But part of the practice, and completely naked, mind you, and part of the practice,
With ashes
all over, yeah, it's a complete Shaiva. Part of the practice is what that does, why he's doing that, is to destroy that sense of shame, embarrassment. The Stoics used to do this, right? The Stoics would intentionally dress stupidly. So when we think of the great Stoics, they would wear like a stupid hat, or put their shirt on backwards and walk around in society, and people would be like, what's wrong with this guy? But the idea of it is the same. Probably not as extreme as the Shaiva, but it's the same. It's to weaken that defense in yourself, or of the image of yourself, because that image is conflicting with who you truly are. That image isn't who you are. Your image, there is no image. You're purely enlightened. Your nature is pure. You are the Atman or the Anatman or Lishunyata. That's your true nature.
It's artificial creation.
Yes. So we're constantly trying to protect, like in Buddhism, the Rupakaya birth, which is the physical birth of your physical being, but you're afraid of the Dhammakaya birth, the birth of becoming a Buddha. You don't want to go through the second birth because you're all good. You've you've come this far, you know. You're 35, it's like, I'm doing all right, you know. Like, if I keep this game going, I think I'm going to be all right. And it's like, when you bring in concepts of death and that to those sorts of people, they, I don't want to know about that. Like, it doesn't happen to them. As if it doesn't happen to them, you know. And it's like, no, you got to go through this other birth, you know. And especially what the Shaivas do, they just go, man, you just go and act crazy in society, just start singing or unconscionably, like just irrationally, just pooing on the street, just do all sorts of crazy thing, and or eat your own poo in some extreme circumstances. And then what happens is it has that transformative effect on you. I don't recommend that to anyone listening, because that is an extreme path. But you can see how that will destroy the ego.
Yeah, they took a whole level of extreme to I respect.
Yeah, you got to respect.
Yeah.
You got to respect. How many times have we seen the complete Agori or the Shaiva Sadhu in Arunachala or Varanasi, or just walking completely naked, just ash just dripping off their dreadlocks, and then you're like, Jesus Christ, did they just hop out of the fire or something like that? Like, what happened, you know? And then, but that's their path, you know what I mean? And they truly understand what we're talking about with the complete dissolution of the ego. And that's actually one of the most powerful parts, is the Dattatreya tradition, the part of the Shaiva and Advaita Vedanta tradition. You and I are familiar with the Avadutta Gita, and when you read the Avadutta Gita, it's what they call a Nidhyasana text, which is a text beyond the pale. So the Ashtavakra Gita is one of those too, but the Avadutta Gita, because that's one we're more familiar with, is one of those Gitas, or one of those books that is beyond enlightenment, beyond the pale of the experience of what it is. And that's what the Dattatreya tradition, because Dattatreya is attributed as with writing the Avadutta Gita, even though Dattatreya can be, the image of Dattatreya is actually the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. But it's a complete dissolution of the ego. It's one of the most intense paths you could follow, and a lot of those individuals we talked about, a lot of the yogis and that we've seen, they do follow the Dattatreya tradition. It's a complete dissolution. And when you read the Avadutta Gita, as you know, like every verse ends with I'm nectarian knowledge, you know, supreme bliss. I mean, it's an amazing text, you know what I mean? Like, and if that can't get you into a state of samadhi, then, I mean, you got rocks in your head. But that's what it's like in that enlightened state beyond the pale. There is no sense of subject, object. There's no sense of he said, she said. None of that exists. It's a non-dual experience where time, space, form, all of it is dissolved into just one state, one non-dual state. And that's what a text like the Avadutta Gita is trying to explain, because an avadut or an avadutta is like the same as a sadhu or a shaiva, but their path is the complete dissolution of ego. And you know that can differ to say Buddhism and Taoism, because they do in some sense speak about psychology. I'm not saying that the Dattatreya tradition doesn't speak about psychology, but they're just speaking about going beyond all at all. You know what I mean? Because in some sense, psychology has something to do with your persona, right? You're trying to understand your persona system, and the Dattatreya tradition is saying, forget about all that. That's all nonsense. That's all Maya. You just go, you be self, you be Atman. You know, I should say Atman, not self, because people get confused. But it should be Atman, undifferentiated consciousness, always, because that's actually who you truly are. And obviously, that's easier said than done, because it's easy for a Dattatreya sadhu. You know what I mean? But not easy for someone. Again, psychological problems can happen for people who are practicing that on Wall Street. because what Wall Street demands of you is completely different than what the Dattatreya tradition is.
Oh, it's too.
It's night and day, right? It's night and day. So one wants you to be full jiva, one wants you to be full atman, you know. But yes, the energy and that, what the Dattatreya is trying to point out, and all of those traditions, is that the energy that we put into trying to keep that ego alive needs to be redirected somewhere else. Needs to be redirected into your spiritual orientation towards your life, not towards how much money and cars and how you look in society. What's my image? First of all, you need to get rid of the image. You know, in Zen Buddhism, one of the spiritual practices, right, is to try and dissolve all mental images, which is a very difficult path because we think in images, we think in pictures. As we all know, right? That's how we all think.
Yeah, that's how our brain works.
That's how our brain works.
We always relate certain thoughts that arise from certain image.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Zen's saying, get rid of the image. I mean, as difficult as that may sound, but obviously the images do decrease with intense meditation, long-term meditation. I wouldn't say they completely disappear, but I would say that the intensity of those images and pictures within your mind will decrease, you know. And so that's an important point of spiritual practice, is to have that, you know, ability to put your attention towards your spiritual practice, as opposed to putting all your energy towards your image of self, you know. Because the image doesn't exist. It doesn't. We've built the image based on our experiences through life and our like you said, our assurances from the people we're around, like, this is who you are, be like this, and
Be one of us.
be one of us, yeah. There's a lot of group mentality, right, and involved in that. So if you are caught a certain way with certain people, then you're fine. And as most of us all know on the spiritual path, when you come back more into your true nature, it conflicts with the other people in your immediate circle, so your friends and your family, because they are so accustomed to seeing you a certain way. When you've pulled the curtain over the theatre and the show is finished, it's hard for them to accept that reality, you know. You can sympathize with that because they're seeing reality from a certain perspective. They're seeing reality from the perspective of an ego, as opposed to you've tasted the sugar and you know it's sweet. You know what I mean? They've never tasted it. They know what sugar is, but they don't know it's sweet, you know. And you've tasted that nectarian knowledge.
Yeah.
You know. So that's basically what... Yeah, sorry?
No, I just wanted to mention that when you read that book by Hubert Benoit,
Mm-hmm.
he said something like, we are all enlightened.
Mm.
Everybody on this planet is enlightened.
Mm.
We just don't know it.
They just don't know it.
Mm.
It's a wonderful book too, like high level stuff. The Supreme Zen, the Supreme Doctrine. Yeah, published by IT Inner Traditions as well. Or I should say republished by them, because it is an older book. But I read that actually in Tiruvannamalai, and it was absolutely mind-blowing. You and I spending time with the sadhus and that, and I'm reading that, and I'm just like, I'm on a fully blissed out. I'm on a whole different level. I'm just like, man, I could go right now. It's all good. Like, but it was it's such a profound book. It's a deep book, and it's actually very difficult to understand in some parts of it, because he was a high level scholar. But yeah, he coming from that pure Zen place too. Like he said, like we're all enlightened, and we actually this is one of the core points of his book, was we actually are all experiencing nirvana, but our mind is just eclipsing the experience of nirvana. We're all experiencing it right now. People watching, you and I here. That's what the experience is. But our sense of self is just eclipsing that. So you just like, that image is eclipsing that. There is only nirvana, he's saying. Which actually aligns with Advaita Vedanta. There is only Brahman, as Shankara would say. But we have the sense of self, which eclipses it. That's why we don't experience lasting happiness, lasting joy. We have fleeting moments, like, oh, we feel great, and then we go back to feeling like crap, and something like this. But there's only nirvana.
Is it almost like, there is only nirvana, there is only Brahman.
Yeah.
But we create our own world of Maya, and we project into this nirvana.
Yes, that's what we do.
And we kind of polluting our own mind through our own illusions, Maya.
We're hypnotizing ourselves.
Right.
We're actually hypnotizing ourselves. Other people are trying to hypnotize us too. The world is trying to hypnotize you, but your acceptance of it is you hypnotizing yourself. You see?
Then you choose to believe.
You choose
that.
yes. You choose it. No, that is the way it is. And it's like, no, that's not the way it is at all. The way it is it's all Brahman. You've bought into the idea of duality, and the idea of duality itself doesn't have many legs to stand on, apart from you can discern things that look different from each other, but you've given a name and form to things, nama rupa, within Buddhism. You've given a name and form, and that's what messes with your perception of reality. So there is only nirvana, right? But because you've bought into name and form, you've bought into the Maya, the measurement of reality, and you are the one measuring the reality. That's your problem. It's not anyone else's problem. You've chose that. You can't blame anyone else. You're the one that's doing it.
Yeah, I can't remember who I heard from, whether either that was from Alan Watts or Ken Wilber or something. Maybe Alan Watts. He's saying Maya exists in here, not out here.
Not out here, yeah.
Yeah, it's all within our mind. That's Maya, and we believe that's real, and we are projecting that into our reality.
Yeah. It's like, those 3D glasses you get in the cinema. We've put those on, and that's how we're seeing the world. We're seeing it in all red and blue, and all of this contrast of color and this and that. But we just have to take those glasses off and see reality as it purely is. But reality as it purely is, as you said, is in here. It's not something out here. Out here is just out here. It's what it is. And from that state of enlightened consciousness is that this is just nirvana. It's just pure non-dual reality, and you're a part of that. There is no you, because the sense of I doesn't exist. The I is Maya, is what is causing the friction between the objective reality and the subject. So the Maya that you have within your mind, the measurement of reality, the illusion that you have within your head, is conflicting with the reality as it truly is.
Yeah, we need to sweep that illusion, and we need to be able to see the things as they are.
Yes.
That's the biggest challenge. And again, like what Hubert Benoit said, we are all enlightened, we just don't know it. And that's the kind of decision that we all need to make,
Yes.
whether we want to believe it or not. Believe that's real or it's not real.
Well, once you dissolve the I, there's no need to believe. That's the thing.
There's nothing to believe.
There's nothing to believe, because you have become what you're saying that you want to believe. And then you know it's true. That's why when you read the text, the classic texts, and they say that this is the truth and this and that, and then when you hear modern scholars and academics and that, they think about it objectively, they don't know that it's the truth, because they have not had the experience of what those great teachers are talking about. They're only studying that, you know what I mean, as an objective sort of study. But once that I has moved out of the way and you've become enlightened, there's only that experience. And you realize that there's only ever been that experience. You know, there was no I ever, you know. It's like what Swami Sarvapriyananda talked about, like that, you know, we often say, who am I, right? So one of his teachers said, who am I is actually a bad question. Because, you know, we see like Ramana Maharishi and all those people. And it is just a language thing. We're getting a bit technical here, but when you say, who am I, you're implying that there's somebody there.
Yeah, as like a person.
As a person. So you have to reframe the question as to what am I? That's more precise. What am I? And what you are is pure nirvana, is Brahman, is Shunyata, is the Tao. That's what you truly are. You're not this person. And if you don't want to believe it, then just look at it in pure child logic. The universe has existed for billions and billions of years, and you're only going to exist for 100. So you're saying that this 100 years is everything. This is what really exists. Or does the rest of it exist? You know, and that's just pure child logic.
Yeah, once we elevate our perspective a little bit, things become much more clear.
They become much more clear, yeah. That's what happens, right? When you clean away that idea, that image of yourself, that sense of ego that you think you are, then you realize that you're no more special than an ant. You're no more special than a little bit of bacteria. You're no more special than that. We've built a world on believing that human life is the be-all and end-all of all life. The only opportunity there is as a human is to realize what we're speaking about today. That's what makes us different to another species, or a bacteria. Is we have an opportunity to realize the nature of the universe, the nature of what we are, and so that's the opportunity we all have, you know. And then when we embark upon that and we actually experience that, or we realize who we truly are, then there's no more questions. All the questions are finished, you know.
Yeah, another analogy you mentioned earlier I like is that also to become real human.
Yes.
Not this human-looking being that really tries hard to survive in this competitive world, but to be who we really are, like as what we were born from the very first place, that being really human before we had a name and ideas of this world.
Yeah.
That just going back to that place and be real human.
Exactly. And being human is divine. That's the difference. We've made religions and spirituality and that around the world, where the human is disconnected from that. But Eastern spirituality is an integration of that. It's an understanding that once we become human, that's when you understand that we are essentially divine. We're not this, we're not just this animal on this world. In this world, we're something much, much higher. But we can only attain that when we lean into the human qualities that we have. We often lean into our animal history, right? Because we have all of the genetic history within us.
To survive.
Yeah, to survive. We have these animal traits from our evolution. We often lean into those, and that usually informs our understanding of religions and spirituality and anything else, actually. But when you lean into your human qualities, compassion, forgiveness, love, understanding, tolerance, then you start to become that, divine being, so to speak, you know what I mean?
Yeah, from that place, we don't have to try anymore. We naturally treat other people with respect. We naturally self-conscious of our own thoughts and
Yes.
language and things like that, we naturally become much more compassionate and human. So whereas when you come from different angle, you know that right thing to do and right way to be, and so you kind of forced to respect other people and forced to, and that becomes a bit unnatural. But first and foremost, if we were to understand how to be really human and process of trying to become that, we naturally become this human being who respects other people and respects our environment. And,
Well, why don't we have inbuilt in education? We have mathematics, we have science, we have English, we have, or what have you. Why don't we have inbuilt human as an education? How to be human? How come we're not teaching our children? Because children know. They have empathy for their friends and this and that and their parents until the education wears them out and they become, just like any other adult, they become a carbon copy of the average adult, right? So competitive, individualistic. Why don't we have a subject at school about humanness? No, it's important to have tolerance. It's important to be compassionate and to empathize with other people's situation in the world. Even if you just have this, I mean, the world becomes a better place in a generation. Do you know what I mean? But it conflicts with the competitiveness of society and the nature of the economy. You know, they don't want people. See, society, nations, culture, they're not your friend, as Terence McKenna said. They don't want you to become enlightened. They don't want you to understand the world and understand other people. They don't want that. They want you to become an obedient worker and to compete with other people in the world. That's what keeps the whole world, this whole samsara ticking around.
Yeah.
Your game as a spiritual seeker is understanding that it's a nirvana and understanding that that whole game of black and white, this whole game of competition is all BS. It's not true. You know.
We need to find the real meaning of dignity. That divine state of being human, really genuine human being. That's real dignity.
Yep.
To become a go-getter and to survive in this competitive world, you need to let your dignity go a little bit, right?
Yeah, sure.
You need to be a little bit of an animal to be that. Yeah.
You have to lean into those animal traits.
Yes.
We were talking about.
You need to really, be aggressive, right?
Yeah.
You need to be a loud person and greedy.
So education and society and culture amplify the animal aspect of yourself, and it amplifies the survival aspect of yourself. It doesn't amplify the divine aspect of yourself. It doesn't define the human aspect of yourself. It amplifies all the things that actually cause all the trouble in the world. And then next minute you have society and that blaming individuals for becoming a certain way. And then you think, from a higher perspective, you think, isn't that quite ironic? You created that person, and now you're taking no responsibility.
It's funny.
It's so ironic, isn't it? Whereas if we had an educational system where you were inculcating all of those divine aspects within children and telling them to lean more into those, then who knows what the world would be like. It's not that the economy and that would disappear. You know, obviously we still need our material needs. It just means that there would be a reorientation of our focus on what's important in life, and maybe advertising and that may disappear, thank God, who knows. But you know what I mean? But it would be a complete reorientation of the world for the better.
Yes. I'm not sure if economy gonna disappear, but well, let's say this way, that we won't have impulsive toilet paper buyers.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The world's gonna become much more communal.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are gonna,
Mm.
come together and coexisting kind of idea.
Yeah.
We help each other, and it is gonna be just complete different world.
I always think about it like in the sense that you and I, when we spend a lot of time in rural India, and rural Indians are they stick to the Sanatana Dharma tradition more than people in Mumbai and stuff like that. So they stick to that tradition, and they have that sense of what is mine is yours. They really have that sense, what is mine is yours. So that communal feeling. And as you and I know, we get completely overwhelmed because of the sense of community in that place is something you never see in those sorts of areas. But I get a feeling that that idea of guest as God, as the way they see the world, would be the way the world would end up if we followed that sort of train of thought, that very humanistic train of thought. Because though those people live in extreme poverty and they live on the breadline, they really know what's important in life. You know, they really know that depending on each other is important. Loving each other and respecting each other is important. And a lot of times in the ignorant Western media, people in poverty are portrayed a certain way, an incorrect way, from people who have never spent time with those sorts of people. You know, and it's not to say that all people in poverty are all pious and good people, but most of them are. We need to also remember that. You know, how many times have we been in the farms around Tiruvannamalai and come across families and they want to invite you in for dinner, and you know they have way less money than you. There's no doubt, it's night and day, the financial situation. But you would never see that sort of activity in the West, you know. And I think that's what we would be leading towards if we went down that path. So anyway, we pretty much unpacked everything, I guess. We talked a bit about enlightenment, we talked a bit about psychology, this and that. Again, this is a subject we can talk about many times. We'll revisit many times, so there's many things we can talk about it. But kind of just trying to get people's understanding that it's not, you yourself will never be enlightened as a person.
As a person, yes.
Yeah, it's a re-identification with what you are and what we all are together is truly one.
Yeah.
So that'll do it.
Yeah, that'll do it.
All right. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time.